Good morning, everyone. So today's presentation is highly visual, so I thank you, Lin-Ray, for bearing with me as we got that sorted out. So we should be, everything's going to be great. Nope. Okay. So as this is a highly visual talk today, I ask you to look there and please join me in Gassho. When we say Namo Amida Butsu, Kannon and Daiseishi, together with bodhisattvas countless as the Ganges sands or as particles, accompany us just as shadows do things. Namo Amida, Namo Amida, Namo Das. So futzy. Okay, so in the Gosandai today, I chose one of Shinran Shonin's verses. It's a hymn. Shinran wrote hundreds of verses during his life in praise, in joy, in gratitude for this Shin Buddhist path. And I decided today to focus on this one because it references two bodhisattvas, in particular Kannon Bodhisattva. My goal today is to talk a little bit about this bodhisattva, their role in our tradition, and the way that it connects us to Buddhists outside of the Jodo Shinshu tradition. And we very much, and rightly so, focus on the writings and thought of Shinran Shonin, but we are part of a larger Buddhist world. And we share many things in common, including a history of reverence for the bodhisattva Kannon. So today I'm going to just talk a little bit about who is Kannon, or who are they? Their place in global Buddhism, their place in Jodo Shinshu, and lessons we can learn. And I won't do it in too long of a time. Lin-Ray, I think I'm going to have, yeah, just spacebar. There's going to be a lot because I have like animations, so I'm sorry. So, thank you. Yeah. So this picture here, so who is Kannon in Sanskrit? Kannon is known as Avalokiteshvara. Gratefully, we can just use the Japanese Kannon, which is a lot shorter. This bodhisattva has a long history in Buddhism. It's from the earliest days of Mahayana scripture and sculpture, we see examples of Avalokiteshvara. The picture here is from the Gandhara region, which is the north of what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, which is a deeply Mahayana area where a lot of important concepts really became strong in Buddhism. What we see here is one of the most common depictions, one of the most common iconographic ways you'll see Kannon, and that's with Amida. So in the center of this sculpture is Amida Buddha. So here's our Amida standing, here's a seated Amida, and on your right we have Kannon, Avalokiteshvara, and on left we have Daiseishi or Mahastama Prapta. So Avalokiteshvara begins as a kind of an emissary or an envoy of Amida. Sometimes Avalokiteshvara, they will come early to visit people. This is something that continues in the tradition. But they're very closely associated with Amida. So closely, in fact, that you can actually see in the crown, can you hit the space bar? In the crown, Avalokiteshvara actually has a little tiny Amida Buddha. It's probably too small to see, so I have a different image. So there you can see an Avalokiteshvara with Amida in the crown. So Amida is within and part of Avalokiteshvara. I would also like you to open up your Shin Buddhist service books to what we chanted today. On page 70, please. So today we chanted the Junirai. And look at this page. Avalokiteshvara wears upon his crown the image of Amida adorned with many precious jewels. He subdues the arrogance of demons and heretics. We won't really talk about, we won't talk about heretics, demons. Thus I prostrate myself before Amida Buddha in this refrain. So even today we chanted this image. So in the tradition, Kannon is closely associated with Amitabha, with Amida. Kannon, the name Avalokiteshvara means the one who perceives the cries of the world, the cries of suffering. So all of the cries of those of us who are living our existences in our daily struggles, in our moments of sadness and grief. Avalokiteshvara is a bodhisattva who is there and hears all of it. They are the all-perceiver. Just as a side note before we go on, this name Kannon inspired an early businessman in Japan in the early 20th century. He was building a new company. It was a camera company. Can you hit the button once? And he said, what should I name my camera company? I'll name it after the bodhisattva who perceives all, Kannon. So that's where the name for that comes from. Aha! Yeah. So if we can go to the next slide. So Kannon is an emissary of Amida, but Kannon also becomes an independent figure. They start becoming the popular in tales. One of the reasons why Kannon becomes so popular is in the Lotus Sutra. So this is not a venerated sutra in our tradition. The Lotus Sutra is the central sutra of the tradition that Shinran started in when he was a young monk. He was in the Tendai tradition. And the Lotus Sutra is their central text. One of the chapters in the Lotus Sutra is all about Kannon. And basically it's like, if you're in this kind of a jam, Kannon will appear in this manifestation. If you're going to drown, Kannon will appear and save you. If you're imprisoned falsely, Kannon will break the shackles. This chapter of the Lotus Sutra eventually became its own thing, and it's widely venerated and widely chanted and widely respected in East Asia. It became an independent sutra. In Vietnam, in China, Korea, Japan, this chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And all it says is, Kannon will help you. If you're in a jam, Kannon will manifest and will help you in particular ways. It's important to note that in this list of manifestations, Kannon appears as a man, as a woman, as an adult, as a child, as non-human beings. Kannon appears in all kinds of ways. That's why I'm using the pronouns they, them for this talk, because Kannon, as a celestial bodhisattva, transcends notions of gender and species. So if you can click to the next one. So Kannon could appear as anybody. And there are thousands of stories from East Asia of Kannon appearing to help people in a jam. And these stories are still told today. People are even today saying, I was stuck out on the road, my car broke down, and someone stopped and helped me, and it was Kannon Bodhisattva, right? A manifestation. So Kannon can appear as anybody, any age, any gender, any ethnicity. There's going to be a couple here. Kannon appears in some stories as a dragon. Kannon appears in one story as a sea turtle to save a drowning person. Kannon appears, there's a story about a white parrot. I can't remember the details of the story, but it's like very specific, the white parrot. And even in one story, Kannon appears as a cloud. So clearly what we're talking about here is a Buddhist world in which forces of support, spiritual forces of support and protection are out there around us. And they will come to us in our moments of need. So we'll move forward a little bit. So Kannon is all the Mahayana traditions have a version of Avalokiteshvara. In Tibet, they are known as Chenrezig, generally male appearing. This one has 4 arms. But Chenrezig can appear in a lot of different ways. The most famous manifestation on earth of Chenrezig is the Dalai Lama, who is believed in Tibetan Buddhism to be a manifestation on earth of Avalokiteshvara, who has come here to help people, right, to provide compassion and Dharma teachings to the world. You may have seen, Lin Ray, can you advance one? You may have seen these types of images. So about 1,000 years ago in China, they started to depict Guanyin primarily as female, though the male images continued, and they still predominate in Korea and Japan. But in Vietnam and China, these images came to dominate. You can see Kannon holding a child, so you can pray for safe childbirth, for protection for children. On the right, Kannon, not as a dragon in this one, but riding a dragon. This is a common image. Something to think about as we approach Lunar New Year next week. We enter the Year of the Dragon. So, and then in the middle, this is in Hainan Island in China, and it's massive. And this is not the only giant Kannon. There are giant Kannon statues in Japan and elsewhere. And so Kannon is a very important figure in global Buddhism. But what does this have to do with us? So what does Kannon play, what role do they play in the Shin tradition? Well, as I recited at the top of this talk, Shinran was a deep believer in Kannon, in the power of Kannon, and particularly Kannon's association with Amida. Right? So the founder of our tradition, Shinran, shown in here directly to your right, the stage left of Amida, he talked fairly regularly about Kannon. One of the most important ways that Kannon manifested in his life is Shinran was a believer, like many people at the time, that Prince Shotoku, there's this Japanese prince, that Prince Shotoku came to Japan as a manifestation of Kannon. That he brought Buddhism into the government. He made a very famous constitution in the 7th century in which Buddhism was given pride of place, and the teachings of Buddhism were given key place in Japanese society. So Prince Shotoku, for Shinran, and he says this in multiple places, is a manifestation of Kannon. So that's Prince Shotoku. Does that look familiar? There it is. That's Prince Shotoku, who for Shinran was a manifestation of Kannon. So I don't know how orthodox it is, but for me, when I look up at this altar, I only think a little of a politician and a prince. I mostly think of the spirit of compassion that is part of our tradition. This is very important for Shinran. Shinran, when he was up on the mountain practicing really hard, right, and became disillusioned with trying to achieve enlightenment through meditation, he came down off Mount Hiei and he went into retreat. And in retreat, he had a vision of Kannon. Kannon appeared in the vision as a male figure wearing white robes and said, basically, it's a little more complicated. Basically, he's like, Shinran, you know what? You've been a monk your whole life, but if you want to get married, that's okay. I will become a wife for you. So it's interesting, right? It's a male figure appears in the dream and said, I will become your wife. So it's okay, you can get married and break the Buddhist precepts, because it's actually me, Kannon, who will be there for you. And this is very important in Jodo Shinshu tradition. Our priests get married, and they have for quite a long time. Now it's common in all Japanese Buddhism, but it started with Jodo Shinshu. So Kannon also played a role in the relationship of Shinran to his wife, Eshini. As I said, it was not uncommon for people to see manifestations of Kannon in others, right? In Japan, Shotoku Taishi was seen as a manifestation of this spirit, but also there were empresses who were seen as spirits of manifestations of Kannon. Eshini herself said and considered Shinran a manifestation of Kannon. And after he passed, while he was alive, his followers said he's a manifestation of Kannon. He's here as an emissary of Amida. He's here to spread compassion, equality, to care for those who are not cared for by society, people who live on the margins. And as Eshini said, yes, Shinran is a manifestation of Kannon. And at the same time, right, because of his vision, for Shinran, Eshini was a manifestation of Kannon. The presence of compassion, the presence of the Dharma in his life was in their marriage, which is pretty great if you think about it. So this continues, the presence of Kannon in the Jodo Shinshu tradition. Right? Because of our doctrine and our teaching, we don't pray to Kannon directly, but this belief that there is a powerful spiritual force of compassion that supports and guides us, that is associated with Amida, that continues in the Jodo Shinshu tradition. Renyo Shonin, who's behind the screen, I didn't figure out a way to get in the 7 masters, so we get 4 of the people today, but Renyo Shonin, who's behind the screen, after his death, people in his biographies said his mother was a manifestation of Kannon. Right? And you can all be Kannon, right? Eshini and Shinran could both be a manifestation of this force because Kannon isn't limited by one body. So what does this all mean? Okay, so this is our little kind of wander through some Buddhist history, what this means for us. So what lessons would I want us to take away from this? So first, one of the reminders is one of the key teachings of our tradition, of Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, all Buddhism, is compassion. Care for others, care for the downtrodden, care for those who've been marginalized in society, care for those who are grieving. This is a key teaching of our Buddhist tradition. It's something we share across the world. I also want to use this today as a chance to remind, especially all those of us who are Jodo Shinshu followers, we're part of a global Buddhism. So the next time you're out and you see a Kannon statue, it's also part of your tradition, right? We share this. This is an image of compassion. And so the last point I want to make is this will land differently with different folks. Right? We don't often talk about this in our tradition. But insofar as you believe in the presence of spiritual forces in the world, right? Shinran taught that as Nembutsu followers, Kannon is looking out for us, literally looking out, perceiving, right, out for us. But there are spiritual forces at work that are protective, that are supporting. And again, our practice is not to invoke the name of Kannon. That's done in many traditions. Our practice is to say Namo Amida Butsu, right? To remind ourselves of the power of true reality working in our lives to teach and guide us. And an aspect of that true reality continues to be in the tradition, something we can call Kannon. So I'm going to end with the same wasan I started with, but also a second one, similar in theme. Please join me in Gassho. When we say Namo Amida Butsu, Kannon and Daiseishi, together with bodhisattvas countless as the Ganges sands, or as particles, accompany us just as shadows do things. Kannon and Daiseishi together illumine the world with the light of compassion, never resting even for a moment from bringing to nirvana those with mature conditions. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namandas, Namandas. Thank you.